Yo, 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 this is Candy Bee Knittin. I'm Candy Bee, and I be knitting. And today we are going to do the first pattern deep dive I feel like we've done in a very long time. I told y'all last week I finished Kagan's Quilt by Carolyn Bloom. If you want to see it all laid out, there's really no way for me to show you this. This thing's taller than I am. Definitely go to my Instagram or my Blue Sky. But we're going to get into it. I'm going to tell you about the pattern, my experience with the pattern, as well as my final, well, I guess not my final, because you got to see how it wears, but a review of the Happy Place yarn from Hobbii that I used. And so, picture it. Fall 2023. I was wanting a blanket for my bed. 1A, because my husband and I, we don't usually go to bed at the same time. One of us usually stays up late. One of us usually goes to bed early. It's just how it works out. And I'm going to say it because this is my show and I can say what I want to say. Mr. Rulud is a blanket hog. He's very greedy with the blankets. He will snatch the blankets off of you at a moment's notice. And so I was like, wouldn't it be nice if I just had my own blanket on my bed and my own, kind of some knitted accoutrement in my bedroom, because I don't really have anything knitted in my bedroom as it exists right now. On top of that, we have since upgraded, but at the time we had a kind of like a scratchy comforter we had on the bed. So I just felt like we just needed an upgrade for the bed, and it would be nice for me to have my own separate blanket for when I go to bed. And so I started scouring the internet, scouring the public library resources, trying to find a blanket pattern that would work. I am very much an admirer of quilting. I really wanted something quilt inspired. On top of that, literally around that same time, the Happy Place yarn from Hobbii had come out, and I had ordered what felt like I had ordered. There's solid and melange. We'll get back to that later. And so I had ordered a bunch of complementary colors, and I was like, I really want to do something with, as you can see here, this is the melange. This is the solid, and I just feel like the colors really lend themselves well to quilt motifs. If y'all have been in the knitting community for the past couple of years, that's literally the moment that the Sweet Shop blanket from Laura Penrose, that came out like the same week I bought this pattern. Like, it was just like, and then like the heirloom quilt cardigan kind of came out around that time. So I love quilts, and quilts are very much on trend right now in knitting. So it was just a very interesting time. And I was like, I think I can do it on my own. Because at first I was thinking I was just going to do one big star. And I was looking at some resources, looking at free patterns. I almost bought a Tin Can Knits pattern, which is kind of in the same family as this pattern. And I literally had the Sweet Shop blanket in my cart on Ravelry, and then I found this one. And the thing that got me about this one is the fact that it is 4 separate motifs sewn together, and the Sweet Shop blanket is seamless. It's sewn in one piece, to my understanding. I don't own the pattern. And this is actually all pieced and seamed together, and I really wanted to get like a true to life quilting experience without a sewing machine and fabric. And definitely, like, I had a lot of waffling going on, but I executed. I got the pattern. I'm glad I did. For all of the things I would go back and tell myself when I first started knitting, for all of the searching and trying to maybe find a free pattern, trying to figure out a pattern, if you find the pattern you want and you can afford it, just buy it, because the time I spent like looking for things and poring over things and hemming and hawing and going back and forth, I could have just bought this to begin with and started on my project. So this is Kagan's Quilt by Carolyn Bloom. She also goes by Bloom Homemade Studios or Bloom Handmade Studios. And just for your reference, there'll be links. She has her own website. I have that I've been linking to. Whenever I talk about the pattern, I link to her website where you can also buy the pattern. And here is a picture of her pattern. And as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different motifs. I usually when I print off patterns, I leave off like the cover page and any like extra stuff, but I wanted a clean copy for making notes for today's episode. And so I read the whole pattern for the first time. And I always assume when someone has a possessive name in the title of their pattern, it's like, oh, Kagan, that must be one of her children's names or something, that she made this blanket for. And actually, according to the front page of the pattern that I didn't read, it comes from Catherine Upittis, or Catherine Upittis, and she is a quilter who made a quilt that looked very much similar to this, and Carolyn Bloom was inspired to make a knitted pattern based on her quilt. And Megan Ingram is the dyer of lichen and lace yarns, and her quilt is made out of that yarn. And so it's Megan plus Catherine, and so Kagan, the K from Catherine and the Agan from Megan. And so I was like, I learned something new preparing for the show. So this is a $6 pattern available on Ravelry and Carolyn Bloom's website. It's 9 pages long. Did I mention it's $6? It came out in June 2017. I purchased it in 2023. And as of today, February 2025, there are 13 projects on Ravelry. Her original pattern is fingering weight in the lichen and lace yarn. And she is very meticulous throughout the pattern, telling you how many grams and yards of yarn she uses in each motif, but the total pattern uses 600 grams of a fingering weight or 2,000 yards. Her blanket is a garter stitch blanket. As I said before, it's seamed, and her final measurements on size 5 needles is 37 inches by 37 inches. The skills you'll need for this pattern, you should be able to seam. She suggests a mattress stitch, obviously knitting, increasing, decreasing, grafting, a provisional cast on, and picking up stitches. My modifications, obviously, mine is much bigger. That is because I used a size 8 needle with DK weight yarn. And I did the entire pattern, save for the border and stockinette stitch. And so I had to, anytime there was any confusion of what was going on, I kind of had to figure it out how it was going to be with the knits and purls. And when she does her increases, she did backward loops cast-ons, and I did make one lefts, make one rights, depending on what side of the fabric I was on. She also uses wrap and turn short rows. I used German short rows. And last but not least, mine is actually seamed in a different order than how she has it in the pattern, because I knew with the colors I was using, I was looking at it today and I was like, oh, maybe I should have switched some of the squares. But I know I have analysis paralysis when it comes to certain things like that. And so I actually had my 8-year-old daughter lay out the squares for me and pick the order, and whatever she picked, I was just going to do, because I knew I was going to hem and haw and be like, oh, should I rip this out? And so that's that. I am not going to bury the lead. I absolutely love this pattern. It is an excellent pattern. I believe it is undervalued at $6. This should be an $8 to $12 pattern. Every single step of the way. She also suggests, on top of needles and notions, my number one advice to knitters: if I have yarn and I have needles, the next tool that's most important to me is my kitchen scale. And so she does suggest weighing your yarn along the way, to make sure that you have enough yarn and you can get through the motifs, because a lot of the motifs call for, if you're trying to make a certain design. And throughout the pattern, she's just like, I did XYZ amount of rows with this color. I did this with this color. So you can easily use this pattern and get the exact same blanket that she made, or like I did, modify it in any one of these motifs. That's why I say at $6, it's definitely a bargain. Any one of these motifs at any weight of yarn can get you its own blanket. Like I could do this whole blanket again, just do the star motif. I definitely 100% want to do this chevron piece again. I thought this was a lot of fun. Oh, that's another method. You'll have to use a garter tab cast on, which is not difficult. I would say that this is kind of slightly beginner friendly. There's nothing in the pattern that's like super hard. I feel like it depends on the beginner. When I was first starting out, I would have been intimidated taking on too much of this, and I would have just had a bunch of pieces and been like, I don't really want to do, like, it's a lot. It may be because mine is massive, but it's still the same amount of stitches. It's just a different weight of yarn, but I probably would have gotten bored with it. Just starting out, I would have wanted to do something small as like my first project, but this was me wanting to step into doing a more long-term project, and so for that, it was perfect for that. So like adventurous beginner, but nothing in here is too difficult. The first motif, and the motif that took me the longest, were these individual squares that I did, because when I bought the yarn, I literally had no idea what kind of star I was going to do. And if you guys are familiar with Missouri star, Ohio star, there are ways I could have rotated these squares and made different designs, and I could have used the colors in a very different way. You can see in her version, she just uses two colors, and then she has this natural white background. Like I said, I really wanted to use that melange and solid in a very intentional way. So this part took me the longest, and then obviously I had to first I had to make lots of swatches to figure out what I was going to do, and that's when I made the decision to do stockinette, and like how my colors are going to lay out. And I made maybe 3 or 4 swatches that did not end up in this blanket. And part of my impetus behind this as well was to use these needles, because these are pretty much one of 2 sets of wooden straight needles that I have, and I just had this hankering to do kind of like it was like a throwback to my early knitting days. And so I was like, I want to make a long-term project, which turned out not to be the case, because literally the only thing I could use it for was these squares, and like the other pieces before they got too big, I was able to use these, but then I switched to a 40-inch ChowGoo circular. But these go back to literally years before I knit. I worked at a bookstore, and I got these knitting needles from a knitting magazine way back in the day, and I just held on to them for years, and so it was kind of a throwback to that. Yeah, super easy, bunch of short rows. You block them to the same size. She has you use just whatever your neutral yarn is to do all of your seaming. I did leave a long tail on each of my squares, and I used that to seam. And mostly I just had to kind of I got really good at judging how long of a tail I needed to use because I also didn't want to run out of yarn. The next one, once I finished that, like I felt like this took me probably like 5-6 months, and then probably around like the summer of 2024, I started rolling with the other parts, and I just kind of jumped right in and quickly finished the other motifs. I think the second one I did was this one, and just playing around again with the melange versus the solid. And this one is where you use the provisional cast on and then you work around and then you end up grafting your beginning and your end. And this print was probably the trickiest one as far as switching garter with stockinette, because I got to the end and she gives you grafting directions, Kitchener stitch directions, and I was just like, this is weird. I've never Kitchenered like this before. It's like, oh, it's because she's telling me how to do one garter stitch edge with another garter stitch edge. And the only time I ever graft is socks in the round, and it's 2 stockinette edges. So I had to kind of figure out on my own the logic of what I needed to do. This one was a lot of fun. This is interesting. This is probably my least favorite square as far as the colors I used and how it looked, but it looks good with the rest of the blanket. But I could see myself doing different colors. And I actually like her square a lot better because she just uses one pop of color and the neutrals with one other color. And I thought she calls it the pinwheel in the pattern, and I like the way she did that, but I just didn't have enough yarn to do just 2 colors in this block. If I could go back, maybe instead of doing this aqua color, I would have picked another color, but I just really was at a loss because I knew I wanted like the 4, the green, the blue, and the red. And I wanted just kind of one little pop punch color. And we'll talk about the Happy Place yarn, but all that yarn is very subtle. And so I picked what I could find was like the loudest color that would kind of be the poison in my color work scenario here. And so overall it came out nice. I'm glad I went back because at first it was going to be just all color, and then I was getting towards the end of the blanket and realized I was going to run out of my main colors, and I only had one ball of what is called the almond color, which is my neutral, and I went and ordered a bunch more neutral because I knew I needed a lot for the border. And then that's when I decided to incorporate more of the almond color in the blanket. And I did these last 2 squares with more of that almond color because I was going to go back and like order like other colors in the line. Let me put these down. And then I was just like, that's just going to be a mess. Like, this is going to kind of go over top my bed. So I kind of wanted to bring in a little bit more subtle neutral. And so, there we go. So then we got into this. Actually, next this is probably the easiest pattern because I've done blankets like this. This is just like kind of like a corner to corner. You increase on one side, decrease when you get to the halfway point. Super duper easy. And I decided to just break up my warm and cool colors. And I did the melange yellow. And literally this, I used like all the solid yellow and then went into the melange. And then this was all the solid red I had left, and then went into the melange red and then striped it with the neutral color. And then here is the chevron I did with my cool colors that I had left over. And I really feel like that's when the teal, I think the teal looks the best on this one, or the aqua rather. Aqua is the name of the color. And somehow it really just goes with the hunter green really well in the blue. I could have had a whole blanket just with this color scheme. So the final, I meant to actually measure it. It's taller than I am. I'm 5'6". I have a king size bed, and it literally covers the top of my king size bed. So very, very generous. like I said, any one of these motifs could be a blanket. I probably, if I'm going to make this one its own blanket, I'd probably use like worsted weight and whatever your proper recommended needle is with worsted weight, an 8 or 9. And even though I did use an 8 for this, the only complaints I have on the blanket are things that I did and chose. Because I did such an open gauge, I used DK weight yarn on a size 8 needle, because the funny thing is I did not realize those wooden needles were size 8s. In my brain, they were size 7s, which are still big for DK, but not that big. And then I was like, oh crap, these are size 8s. But I was like already committed to using those. And once my brain is locked into something, it's locked in. So quite an open gauge, which I kind of wanted because I want this to be kind of like a blanket for all seasons that can just stay on my bed without overheating. But with that, the open gauge and doing stockinette, knitting a square like this is very hard. And so like all of my squares were very much skewed because your knit stitches are longer than your purl stitches. And so I had to be very intentional when I blocked everything and then when I seamed everything. And so this square actually came out really well because I was very meticulous with knitting this and seaming this and blocking it to a square. There is just the slightest nubbin in the very middle of the blanket where I seamed, because there's just a little bit of extra fabric here because they're not perfect squares. Once it lays flat on the bed, you really can't tell. And I really, on the back, when I seamed the squares together, I kind of like pulled the yarn pretty tight around the center here, and that helped it lay a little bit more flat. But definitely the ticket with knitting perfect squares is to knit garter stitch on gauge. The other thing that I did, she's very exacting in the pattern. She tells you how many stitches to seam, how to lay everything out. And I got to the very end, and this happens to me all the time. I don't know, something to work on. But I get to the end of a project and I'm just like, I don't care anymore. Let me just finish it. And so rather than look at how many stitches she tells you to pick up for the border, I just picked up every stitch for the border because I also have a fear that my garter stitch and my bind off is going to be too tight, because I've had that happen on blankets before and I had to rip out entire borders on blankets because of that. And so my border flares actually it flares significantly, especially on the squares that are like, what is it? This one where it's like on the bias, this gauge is so off that it kind of like, it has like almost like a rippling effect on the edge. It's a blanket. It's going to stretch out over time. It's going to grow. And you want that drape with a blanket, but for Instagram pictures, didn't look the best. So probably if I had picked up how many stitches she told me to pick up and done it exactly the way she told me to do it, and like she gives you little tips about, go up a needle size for your garter stitch bind off so your bind off isn't too tight. Like I said, she tells you exactly where to stop and start with certain colors. I did, in one of the videos I was doing, I was kind of nervous about this coming to a point here. The color worked out perfectly. I thought I was gonna have to like duplicate stitch to make it look more pointy, and it's fine. This square is kind of tricky to block because when you're doing that garter tab cast on, you get that little hump when you first cast on. And so this one I had to just be I have like the gridded blocking mats, and so I just had to be very intentional. I finished the whole blanket. I blocked this first because I needed to block these and seam these first. But then in the pattern, she tells you, hey, try to block all of these to the same size, so that they're as square as possible before you start seaming, even though your stitch count is going to be off. That was the trickiest part too, was all of these squares. They have different stitch counts. They're technically the same size. And so just kind of eyeballing, and I seamed this over Christmas, and it took me like 2 days because I was constantly ripping it out and going back and trying to like, oh, pick up every other stitch, pick up 3 stitches. But I got very proficient at mattress stitch doing that, so it was all to the good. Um, yeah, 10 out of 10 pattern though. I definitely want to knit it using her instructions because I think it'll be even better then. Um, and I will definitely, when I start knitting baby blankets again, uh, the baby blankets are going to look very familiar because I'm just going to use these. And obviously with this one, you can just, like I said, you can rotate these squares any way you want. The inspiration quilt that she used actually has a cross or a plus sign rather than a star in it, that you could do with these squares. So I'm going to transition to talking about the yarn. I used Happy Place yarn from Hobbii. That is the yarn line that was brought to you by Tony Lipsy of TL Yarn Crafts. It's $9.49 a ball. I used 12 different colors, but I got the almond because when I had to go back and order more yarn, a lot of the colors are sold out and I don't know if and when they're coming back. I believe that she is doing another run of it. But when I went back, there was no solid almond left. There was only almond melange, but I literally cannot tell the difference between the almond melange and the almond solid. The makeup of the yarn is, I think I just knocked over the notes on the yarn. Oh, no, I didn't. Is 50% cotton, 50% wool, 100 grams, 273 100 grams, 273 yards per gram. And all in all, I ended up with 5 colors of this almond color, and I barely broke into the 5th ball of this. I purchased 15 balls that all went into this blanket, but when I did the math and like weighed, these are all my leftovers, and y'all know I knit a whole nother sweater using some of this yarn too, and so I had lots of yarn left over, but to get this patterning I had to use 15 balls of yarn. But when I did the math of like weighing and seeing how much yarn I had left over, about 3,000 yards, 3,100 yards of DK weight yarn. So if you wanted to do this in DK weight yarn, you wouldn't necessarily need 15 balls. You would need like 10 to 12 balls. And that's also if you're not picky about your color placement. If I had like just completely just done this from beginning to end with no regard to color, I probably could have used a lot less individual balls of yarn. The colors I use, like I said, this is almond and almond melange mixed together. The yellow they call ochre, and there's ochre solid, ochre melange. The red is called Red Delicious, and it's Red Delicious solid, Red Delicious melange. Blue is blueberry, same principle there. The teal color that I keep calling teal is actually called aqua, and the green is called hunter green. Overall, I give this yarn a B+. My positives are the price for the content of yarn, the fact that it's all natural fibers for $10 a ball. The fact that it's cotton and wool together, I'm partial to that. Like, Tony came up with this yarn based on her personal taste, and I actually had the same taste. If I were to come up with my own yarn, I would probably do a similar makeup because you get the coolness and the structure and the stitch definition of the cotton with the softness, the naturalness, the drape of a wool. It's great for my climate. As I told y'all, I live in Virginia. We get, we're very seasonal here, so I can cuddle up with this in the winter. Y'all saw me wear this the entire time I was filming last week, and I did not overheat, and so it just breathes very nicely. As I said before, it lends itself very well to patterns like this where you want to play with colors of the same tone. like for instance, like gingham, like if you wanted to knit a gingham pattern, you could play with the melange and the solid and make a gingham for yourself, and I think that's pretty cool. Machine washable. Like I said, the color is very cohesive. DK weight is super versatile. Tons of patterns for DK weight stuff. Not too heavy, not too light. Crowd pleaser yarn. As far as my negatives, I've mentioned my negatives before, but I just kind of wanted to put it all into one place. My negatives are mostly based on my personal, like the most base preferences. Overall, the yarn, like I said, it's good for the price. I had very few factory knots. I think most people say 3 is acceptable. Most of my balls did not have any factory knots, and if they did, they had 1 in them. There were places where the yarn was a little bit underspun, but blending cotton and wool together, there's the staple length that's going to happen. Once again, 1 or 2 places in any of the balls of yarn. So the quality of the yarn is great. The price is right. It is international. I think Hobbie's in Denmark. So I did have to order it online. I know not everyone has, access to do that. And I know, as of when we're recording now, there is some uncertainty about the cost of shipping, about tariffs and stuff like that. So not, wildly accessible to everyone. I don't know if Hobbii ships worldwide. I get a little bit nervous ordering things internationally. I really wanted this yarn because I really wanted to support what Tony was doing, and I just knew I was gonna like it. Like I said, the 50% cotton, 50% wool. But yeah, ordering international gives me pause. My preferred way to shop for yarn is in person. My biggest complaint about the yarn is this is Tony's baby, and so she picked colors that she liked that are, like I said, the colors are super cohesive. It's a collection, but she is very subtle when it comes to color. She's not going to do neons and things like that. She's very like beachy and subtle. She's already said that she does not like the color purple, so there is no true purple in the line, which purple is literally my favorite color. There's like an aubergine color that's like super subtle and nearly brown to me. And that's the other part about shopping online. It was very hard for me to get a true idea of what these colors were going to be. Like she posted on Instagram what her colors were looking like, but even that's a picture. And so I kind of took a bit of a gamble. The green was pretty true to life. The red was probably the most disappointing because it was called Red Delicious, and so I was expecting an appley red, and this definitely read very orange to me when I got it. The other complaint that I had, obviously it worked out for me that the almond and the almond melange weren't that distinct from one another, because I needed them to match. But a lot of the melanges, and I think she said something to that effect when she, if they do it again, the dye is going to be a little bit different. But the whole point of the melange is that the cotton takes the dye a little bit differently than the wool, and that's where you get this kind of like kind of dusty coloring book kind of look to it. But like I said, I want it like, melange yellow, and this is called ochre, which I don't think this is an ochre, and blueberry. The names kind of throw me off. But you see this aqua here. Very subtle difference between the aqua melange and the aqua solid. Like there was points where I was like holding the yarn up to make sure I had the right yarn, and that overall is my biggest complaint about Hobbii. Is on the website they had the color names, and I'm like, okay, I want red, let me pick the red. But when you actually get the yarn, the ball bands only have a number on it. And so I had to, for the purposes of this episode, go back on my invoice and look at what color I actually ordered to figure out what the name of it is. And so like on my invoice, they're like, you ordered 9, and then the ball band says 9. And I'm just like, I had to keep the ball bands with all of the yarn. But at the same time, the ball bands were completely useless because I'm just like, what is 9 or 20 or 25? Like, what does that even mean? And on top of that, because the solid is a different product than the melange, they have the same number on the ball band. And so this blueberry is blueberry number 20, and the melange is blueberry melange, but it's 20 in the melange line. And so it's very quirky. I don't know why they do it that way. I survived. And I sound like I'm being very overly negative, but I really like the yarn. But like I said, if it was like available and I could go into a store and pick the colors I want and know exactly what I'm getting, that's just a preference of mine. But I'm super, like I said, I really wanted to support what Tony was doing. I know she's going to bring it back and, you know, maybe change up the colors a little bit, different colors. And so, yeah. Will I knit with it again? Probably not, just because I don't order yarn online that much. I have some left over. This would be great for like garment knitting. I knit a sweater for my daughter. She's worn it every single day, like a sweatshirt. But I'm probably going to, I have one more project, and it's a very small project that I'm going to use this yarn for. And then I'm probably just going to donate the rest of it because, as far as like my stash and the mix of what I have, I don't have a lot of wool cotton blend, which is why this yarn is so cool and so special, because I don't see that blend that often. But I would have to go out and buy more in order to make anything of any substance. I have this much of my border color left, a scrap of this, a scrap of that, some of this. I'm gonna, yeah, like I said, I have one more thing, small thing that I'm gonna make with this, and then I'm probably gonna pass it on to the next person, and maybe they'll touch it and get to use it a bit, and you know, maybe they'll be moved to order it online. I also have one of my swatches left. And so that's that. And then here I did this swatch, and you can see how subtle that difference is. That's the reason why I used just these 4 colors in this first motif, because I made this square and I was just like, I'm not crazy about the lack of contrast here. I will say another benefit to this yarn is I made that swatch, and then another swatch I made, as soon as I got the yarn, I swatched the red and the almond together and washed it to see if the red would bleed, and it did not bleed. And so I was like, okay, now I'm good. Now I feel good about going forward with this project, because red is I think red and some blues, some purples, but I just knew, I was like, let me try this because I know I'm trying to make something that's probably going to go into the washing machine. Let me double check that. So a positive. I feel like I was overly negative, but honestly, I would give it an 8 out of 10. I think it's fabulous yarn, and I enjoyed working with it, and I love the finished product. I was like kind of tempted to just leave it on the couch for myself. I put it on the bed last night. I was actually quite warm laying underneath it on the bed last night. Like I said, I've been working on it while watching The Wire, and just having it draped over me while I was weaving in the ends, it was just perfect. I had like a lot of cotton blankets when I was a kid, and just the texture of it just takes me back to a very nice place. So that was my very meandering overview of not only Kagan's quilt, but Happy Place Yarn. What is the longest you've ever spent on a project? This is probably 16 months worth of work here for me, which is a lot considering I've been knitting for like 5 years. So, you know, I've spent 25% of my knitting career working on this. Do you have something that's on the needles right now or on the hooks right now that's in your house that you've been working on? I remember the first time I brought this up, someone mentioned a blanket that they had somewhere that they had made for a child, and that child is now an adult. Let me know. I'm very curious. I'm always interested to know stuff like that. I think that's really, it puts it in perspective, because I was when I committed to this project, I was like, do I really want to commit to like a year-long project? And I'm like, I guess, you know, I'm a knitter now, so, you know, I'm going to be knitting. So what's the harm in that? And I know some people, they start like those coziest memories blanket, and they're very much okay with just waiting and having like one square at a time and gathering their scraps. And I just find that to be very interesting. Let me know. You can leave comments below. You can hit me up on Instagram at Rulude. You can send me an email, candibknittin@gmail.com. You can message me on Blue Sky, or hit me up on the Ko-fi. Share this video, like this video, hit the bell for notifications. Oh, subscribe. That's how, you get the algorithm to give you the things that you like, is to subscribe to the things that you like, and you will get more of the things you like, allegedly. Until next time, peace.